You're listening to the Embrace Family Recovery Podcast, a place for real conversations with people who love someone with the disease of addiction. Now here is your host, Margaret Swift Thompson.
Welcome back. Today, I'm incredibly honored to welcome two guests whose personal stories of resilience, recovery, and friendship are truly inspiring. Bob and Joe are not only men in long-term recovery, but also dedicated fathers who have faced challenges of addiction with their own families. With years of experience navigating demanding careers and the complexities of parenting through recovery, their bond as sponsor and friend has shaped their journey. Both are committed to working their programs daily, knowing that it's the foundation for everything else, including their intervention and recovery coaching business, East West Recovery Coaches. Please meet Joe and Bob.
The Embrace Family Recovery Podcast.
So welcome, everybody. I'm actually excited today because I get to introduce you to not only one person, but two wonderful human beings who have made it their mission, from what I can tell, to help the fellow sufferers of this illness. So what I'd love you to do, Bob and Joe, is introduce yourself how you would like to be known from the point of view of people listening. Who are you? And if you're willing, and there is someone in your family who we're a qualifier around who has the disease, share that, or whatever part of your recovery you're comfortable sharing. So I'm going to invite Bob. Why don't you go first, and then we'll pitch to Joe.
Sounds good. My name is Bob Munsell. I grew up in the Northeast U.S. and I have plenty of qualifiers in my family. I grew up in an alcoholic, dysfunctional home, and I often say I've been clean and sober 31 years myself.
Amazing.
And I have three children, and I look at my role in life as breaking that chain. You know, we look back in my family history, and it's generation after generation of looking like this successful, well-educated, whatever, outside, and the inside of the home being that alcoholic dysfunction. And it was those two divergent things that I was like, when it hit me, I'm like, oh my God, I'm a link in this chain. I've got to break this. And so I had my last drink at 34, and I had two children at the time, and now I have three. And I saw that juncture, like I'm either going to join the new team or I'm going to stay on the old team, like every male in my family has, that looks great and is a dumpster fire at home. And so I got clean and sober, had a really great business career, and then retired a little over a year ago. And this is going to segue into what Joe is going to say as well. I still sponsor Joe. So we've been friends for over 25 years. We met in an AA meeting. And so when we were both getting ready to retire from our business lives, we talked like, what are we going to do? And the term ikigai is really what is at the bullseye of this. I don't know if you're familiar with that Japanese term.
Say it again.
Ikigai.
Ikigai.
It's the confluence of what I love to do, what I'm good at, what the world needs, and what I can be compensated for. Where those four things come together, that's your ikigai. Joe is doing some work, like, what am I going to do? I'm doing some work we're talking. And then this just happened like so organically. We're going to do this. We're going to do interventions and recovery coaching. And I'm going to stop talking to give Joe a chance, but it's just been the greatest.
Wonderful.
Okay. All right. I love when Bob brings that up too, because that's really it. I'll send that to you. Well, I certainly will jump off a little bit of what Bob said too, and just that we had these careers, and Bob and I have always been close friends since we met 25 years ago. And how this developed was really incredibly organically. We weren't planning to do anything together, and it just happened. So for me, I am one of 7 children. I grew up in the Northeast as well, close to Bob.
Mm-hmm.
And, there was a disease on both sides of my family. But my mother and father didn't really have it. My mother needed to kind of medicate herself each evening more than my father did. But I never saw my parents drunk.
Mm.
But in their family, immediate family, deaths at early ages from alcoholism, before it was really recognized, and not necessarily denial, but life just kind of went on and it wasn't talked about, which was kind of interesting. I have 5 children, and when I went into treatment 25 years ago, I had 4. The oldest was 9 years old, and today 3 of them are in recovery.
Amazing.
So with long-term sobriety. So, qualifiers for me, to be honest with you, Margaret, I wasn't planning on getting sober, but I knew myself for a long time that I wanted to change and needed to change. It was affecting my professional life. It was affecting my family life. And I had an intervention done on me by a couple of brothers. And while they were not as aware as some other people were, because I wasn't necessarily drinking and drugging around them as I was around friends. It was a friend of mine. I won't mention his name here, but a dear friend, he remains a dear friend today, who called them. And he had seen me kind of at my worst and said, I think Joe needs help. And so I had an intervention done. We had that relationship with Hazelton. I went home. I told my wife kind of what had just happened in a parking lot, in a motel parking lot. That's how it all went down for me. Told my parents the next day, took the next day to kind of get my affairs done at work. And off I went. I worked for a family company for 30 out of my 40 years of my professional career. I was in a related business for the first 10 and lived in New York. And so my boss was my father. So I went over to their house. He lived very closely to me. And they were incredibly supportive from the moment I told them and all the way through it. And so I think I was certainly a better father as a person, but I was also a better person when they developed their own issues around drugs and alcohol. My wife came in 3 weeks after me, after attending the family program at Hazelden. And they said to her, and she'll tell you this, the $64,000 question, tell me about your drinking. And so she went home. She never went to treatment. So by the time I got home, she had not drank for about a week. And she's been in the program and very involved, as I have been for 25 years, sponsors a lot of women. And so, Bob and I won't speak for Bob, but we have sponsored a lot of guys over our years. And so when we put this whole thing together, as you know all too well, there's a difference between recovery coaching and sponsorship. So as we built kind of the model for the business, we had to kind of know what that is, because we're not their sponsors.
Right.
So that's how I would like to be thought of, as a guy that came in not having any idea what this was about. And today, first and foremost, a family man, but my sobriety always comes first, because I lose everything else if I don't do that.
Amen. Interesting. I was in the family program for a majority of my tenure at Hazelden, and many times had the privilege to witness people who engaged in their own recovery as family members when they got through the family program and realized, wow, I need and deserve help for my use as well. It's not just my loved one who's in treatment. So what a beautiful story to hear that your wife had seeds planted and awareness is given to her, that she then followed through and chose to embrace recovery for herself.
And while I could say her use wasn't as bad or tragic as mine, she grew up in an alcoholic home, highly functioning parents, alcoholic home. So it was the behavior that she had grown up with for a long time. So she was ready.
You are both examples in the stories that you have shared so far of, we hear a lot about the devastation of the disease, which no one can deny. We live it, we've seen it, we've experienced it firsthand, and in the work that you do and I do. What I love about your mission, your passion, your story, and the fact that you now are helping people in your business is that you offer the image of the impact of recovery on the whole family, because you are walking, talking examples that not only has recovery gifted you so much, but it's gifted the people you love so much, whether it's been them finding their recovery, you being a role model to know that it's possible, or your partner, or being a better human around the people who you love because of your recovery. So I'd love to touch on that a little bit from both of your perspectives, because we do hear a lot about the risk of death and the chronicity and the pain of the disease, but we don't often hear about the hope of recovery as that domino effect within the family. And both of you have a story that shows that.
I'll just say this. When Joe and I were putting a website together, we're trained interventionists. We're trained recovery coaches. I'm a certified meditation instructor and a certified yoga instructor. I've done first aid, Narcan. So we have all those boxes checked. I was saying to Joe, our superpower, other than the fact that we had these crazy careers and we're used to dealing with intense situations where we have to hold our space, our superpower is we held down jobs, raised kids in new sobriety. And when we were putting this on our website, I said, it's going to go last, but in reality, the conversations I have with families, they're always pointing at the person, the client, the intended patient, not realizing the whole system, right? And this is something that you know well, Margaret. And when we get into that, I find so often that I'm explaining a little bit of my story so they can touch the reality of how that works. You can get a certificate in whatever, but boots on the ground, raising a family, in my case, going through a divorce, raising my 3 children, intense career, the balance piece, because as we know, I was alcohol was my drug. There's no balance, right? And so now when we deal with families, we find, Joe and I talk almost every day, and every case that we get, whether it's recovery coaching or interventions, one of the things that I think sets us apart is I'm calling Joe, this is my situation. I have, the last one I just did was a heroin benzo addicted couple living in the basement of the male's mother. And so every intervention is a 3D puzzle. That one, because it was a couple and I had 2 families and I had to explain to each family, you're not only a system for the male, a system for the female, now you're a system for 2 families. And I can't even start to say how important that discussion was, so they could get a toehold in the fact of what their role was going forward.
How about you, Joe? What do you think the hope of your recovery story brings?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think when Bob and I show up, we don't look like alcoholics or drug addicts anymore, right? And I think the appropriate time we share our story. And, for me, drugs were a big part of my story. I found my home in AA, but I've been to a lot of NA meetings, but drugs were a big part of my story. And a lot of the younger kids we would do interventions on, it's usually more drugs than it is alcohol, combo of the two, right? Older tends to be alcohol. They don't believe that we kind of went through the same thing. Now, it's all changed in the last 25, 30 years. I think it's a lot scarier environment out there. So with fentanyl and opioids, and Bob and I kind of missed all of that. My children didn't. A couple of my children did not, which was the scary part. But I think sharing their, what our story is, and they don't want to hear a lot about kind of the rah-rah AA stuff either. That doesn't resonate well with them. So I think we're both very careful of just kind of introducing ourselves. What Bob and I too we're creative when we are approaching a new client and a family, and we're really, really good listeners. And Bob touched on it too. I think that our professional careers with a lot of responsibility has served us, continues to serve us very well in this business, because we bring all of that with us in terms of interactions with different kinds of personalities and people. And there's not a lot that kind of ruffles us when we're in an intervention. And all of those get, it's a tense time. It's scary. I had a family, I haven't done the intervention on it yet, but the IP male, 60 years old, had a wife, his 3 sisters, and his 83-year-old mother on a Zoom last week. None of them stopped talking. I had to interrupt them about 15 times to say, ladies, so let me ask you a few questions about him, right? But I know where they are because, they've been scorned, they've been lied to, right? All of that is there. And so we come into situations with our experience where we kind of cut through all of that. We recognize it. We can identify it with it. And we just kind of, we start to kind of build that foundation. And I think because of kind of our time in treatment, our time doing other things, and to Bob's point of raising families, there isn't a dynamic that we haven't kind of encountered.
This podcast is made possible by listeners like you.
Hi, I am Margaret Swift Thompson, and I am so grateful you're listening to this podcast. It means more to me than you know. As a result of the growth and continuation of my mission to help more family members find resources and enhance their toolbox with things that can help them navigate this journey of recovery, I want to let you know that I'm coming back with family coaching. So I'm starting the Embrace Family Recovery Coaching Group again. And I want to make sure people know that this is a group and it's a coaching group and it's open to anyone impacted by the disease of addiction from a family's perspective. So it could be your parent, your partner, your child, a sibling, anybody. If you would like to be a part of this educational and supportive community, please go to my website, embracefamilyrecovery.com, and look into the coaching group. We're going to have it for all people impacted. So we're not going to divide the group into parents or partners or siblings. We're going to just have an Embrace Family Recovery coaching group. So if you want to know more, please head to my website and find out more, learn more. And if you have any questions at all, please reach out to me by email at margaret@embracefamilyrecovery.com.
You're listening to the Embrace Family Recovery Podcast. Can you relate to what you're hearing? Never miss a show by hitting the subscribe button. Now back to the show.
So you've touched on the fact that you are coaches and interventionists. What is your business called?
Go ahead, Joe.
East-West Recovery Coaches.
And you mentioned superpowers, being 2 men in recovery. I would add as well 2 men, like you say, who've worked in a career that was highly demanding and that you have navigated recovery with a growing family, with children who have struggled with the same illness you experienced. Your own personal relationship as sponsor and friends for years, actively working your own program still because that's your priority because you know everything else goes away. Those are all incredibly powerful things you bring to the table when you work with a family because you intrinsically understand your own journey as a recovering person in the disease aspect. You also understand the impact on the family side because both of you have sat on that side, which offers your clients a tremendous amount. And I think that's wonderful. I'm curious about the intervention component because there's a lots of feelings about interventions and lots of judgments or assumptions. One of the things that I would always tell my clients when I worked in the treatment center who came as a result of an intervention, I would have them look at the fact of how absolutely terrified their loved ones were and the courage it took and the care and love for them it took to actually come up with an intervention for them. Because it is one of the most risk-taking in one way and loving gesture a family member can make. And not everyone can do it and not everyone will do it. But what's your experience of that when it comes to being the person in the room doing the intervention? Would you agree that it's a highly courageous and loving act?
I'll start, Joe, if it's okay.
Yeah.
So the way we do interventions is have the family meeting the night before. Ideally, there's all kinds of variations, but ideally, I sit with the family for several hours the day before. We're writing the letters, the various letters, which we can get into or not. But part of what I talk to the family about, they need to buy into me, right? Here we are now, we're all sitting in a room, things are really real. And I explain the infrastructure of how I think this should go. But I said, I'll always tell people our fuel is love. Okay. The most loving thing that you can do, like you were saying, Margaret, is to be here now. What we, all people who haven't been through either the intervention process or training, think the most loving thing to do is what we've been doing, which most often is codependency. And when I sit with the family and do that, you can see when we talk about the most loving thing, you can see the room just deflate a little bit as far as that high pressure tension. And when Joe said something about creativity, because I'm a meditation instructor and not a lot of people have done meditation or are comfortable, I do a 90-second breath work with people. And it's another thing where you start to feel the room just come down a little bit. Mm-hmm. And we do it at the family meeting, mm-hmm. and we do it prior to the intended patients arriving at whatever location it might be for the intervention. And those are just some of the things that Joe and I, we think, okay, what would we have wanted when we were getting an intervention or clean and sober? And so we integrate those things in. I always reassure the family that when you really dig into this, you're going to see most people aren't brave enough to be sitting in this room right now with us.
Agreed. And you brought up something that I think is really important to dissect a little more. And that is that meditation that you bring in. What I know, my language, is family members live with this perpetual monkey chatter in their brain. It is a voice in their brain that keeps them fixated and focused on fixing, managing, and controlling the person they love and adore, who they see crippled, if not dying in front of their face, and they can't seem to reach them. Mm-hmm. I imagine in the middle of an intervention, every instinct of trigger response, that monkey is screaming at them. He's going to hate you. She's going to walk out. It's never going to work. You're never going to be able to do this. You're never going to have a relationship again. What is wrong with you? But you've got to do something. And what are we going to do? And it's probably going the whole time. So I think of the people who are so dysregulated emotionally because of the monkey screaming at them. Mm-hmm. That 90 seconds is such a gift to learn to be here and now, be in your skin, be in your body, and know that, yes, this is scary. And you're doing a great, courageous thing to assist your loved one in getting the help they deserve. And the outcome is beyond us. We have to trust the process.
Yeah.
Yes, you just don't know, right? But what we've also found too is that we could do an intervention and the loved one storms out and they don't want it, but then they might come back a week later or 2 days later, because part of obviously what we talk about is if that happens, and this was, Bob and I just playing off one another, but I loved what he said, is the boundary consequence portion of this, which is the end, and let's just say they said no, needs to be as if they're running down the driveway and you can say it in 10 seconds, right? But I also say to families when they come in, and you're absolutely right, Margaret, they come in and they're not in a good state. And so they are worried about confronting this person who, usually there's been behavior that is angry, belligerent, really unhealthy. And, we have to kind of get in the middle of that and say, listen, they may not love it now, but they will love it and see that when they get on the other side of this thing. Right. So it's easy to convince the client that in a room full of family, you're going to lose all these family. They've had it. You're going to lose all of them. But the family, on the other hand, by standing up to them, is worried that they're going to lose him or her. Like, if I do this, they're going to, like you said, they're going to hate me. I said, no, they won't. They won't hate you. So that dynamic there is and it's a bunch of chess pieces. It's
right.
I had one recently where the father just said to himself, I can't be there. I can't stand my daughter. I'm going to say the wrong thing. And when we're with families, it's really important that you do not, if it's not going well, give out ultimatums. It's not ultimatums like, I will have to leave you today. It's, I'm not sure this relationship can continue. I can't do this anymore. That kind of talk. And the father didn't want to be there. The father had not seen his daughter in a year and a half. And we concluded after a couple of days that he should be there, and it was fine if he said nothing. I said, if you're going to say anything angry, don't say anything at all. But I think it's important. And Bob and I have to figure out who those right people are, because that may not have been the right person. And just be there. And that's going to mean a lot to your daughter that you showed up. And you'll find yourself saying something. So all that coaching beforehand to get them settled in as much as you can. Because when that client, that loved one walks in the door, that's a scary couple of minutes right there.
I'm sure. Of course, I can imagine my listeners are saying, so what did the dad do? Was he silent or did he speak?
He spoke and basically said more than once, I love you and I want you to get help, which is what I told him to say. If you can't say, it's not a time to bring up anything that has happened in the past. Nothing. Zero. We're all done. What got us here is not important. It's looking towards the future. And that's what he said.
And to that point, isn't that ultimately what every family member who reaches out to you wants? No matter how angry, hurt, confused, bewildered, frustrated they are, they want their loved one to be well. And they do love them. And, it's interesting with that point that you just made that I think is really probably important for family members to get a repeat of, is in the intervention, it's not a time for the past. It's not a time to bring that up. It's not a time to rehash or blame or any of that stuff. What aligns so beautifully with that is 12-step recovery, because if the person accepts the gift of treatment, accepts the offer of recovery, leans into recovery, and chooses to work a 12-step program, they will come back and address the past. They will come back and make amends. And higher power willing, the family member engages their own recovery, will do the same parallel journey through their steps work and do the work they can to heal their past. And I think that that's such a gift to an intervention if people understand that that is the journey of 12 steps, because not everybody gets that. Not everybody understands that this is the only, correct me if you have any other knowledge, the only program of recovery for any chronic, progressive, and potentially fatal illness that has a requirement in it that we clean up the wreckage by the disease, but we don't beat ourselves up for having the disease. And families don't understand that, because if they've not been in a 12-step meeting, not heard the beliefs of the foundation of recovery, how would they know that? So that's I would think that would be part of the coaching on the upfront part. There will be time and place for that to be done.
Right.
It won't be rapid. I mean, I don't know about you two. It took me a good solid year before I made amends to my family. I had to work the steps to get there. I don't know about the both of you. Do you have a willingness to share that, how long it took before you were cleaning up the wreckage the disease caused in your lives?
Go ahead, Joe.
Well, me longer than a year. Margaret, longer than a year. I sat with it. It of course makes me think about my sponsor gave me a lot of homework assignments.
You needed the right sponsor.
All right, Margaret, I flunked a few homework assignments, right? But it was me just guilty, right? Bob is incredibly well read, and today actually when he picks out a book, I usually get it right away because I always get something out of it. But when I was in the middle of it, I kind of didn't know where to start first, right?
Right.
I loved being sober. I loved that I wasn't telling lies. But I was ready when I was ready to do that. And what's interesting, my parents were both still alive, and they died. I was 6 years sober when they died. They died a couple months apart. I don't think I ever did a proper amends to them, almost like they weren't asking me to do it, because they were incredibly loving and supportive. I went to their graves because I've done, gone through the steps like we have a number of times, and did it again, and did it at a grave site. And I can't tell you how emotional that was when I was just kind of looking at their names on a, like, I said, sorry. They weren't looking for a sorry. I knew that, right?
Yeah.
But I needed to do that. They never left my side through all of that.
Oh, they loved you
Yeah.
unconditionally. And the other thing that I'm sure you did, as I did, on whatever length it takes, and Bob, we'll get to your story because I'd love to know, is we were making living amends by being honest, by showing up, by being trustworthy, by having integrity until we got to the point of the actual formal amends. So though we don't actually necessarily speak to people, plus if you have a good sponsor, which I have a feeling you do, they will direct you as to whether it's appropriate to do it in person, via letter, when it's not appropriate, when it's a living amends, because all of that is part of the work. And for families listening, that process is so vital for taking time. And this is what I've always said. It's because when we first land in recovery, you don't trust us. You don't have a reason to trust us. We don't trust ourselves.
Right.
And so when we do those steps and we get to that work and we come to you and we say, here's my list. I want to sit down with you and I need to share these. And then we say, is there anything we left off? And we actually hear it and don't get defensive. You want that to take time, because otherwise, are you going to believe it? Probably not.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Bob, what about you? How long did it take you to make amends?
Well, I'm going to start by going to the end of the story, because a year ago November, so I'm at that point 29 years clean and sober. All right, I'm like super healthy, whatever. Well, I was taking a supplement, and it affected my heart. And you know where they always say, check with your physician before you take the supplement. Well, I thought that's baloney, so I didn't do it. And in the middle of the night, I go into this whole like AFib thing. I end up in a cardiac unit and my heart stops. So this is a year ago, November. And so I went offline. Like I was going into the next realm, whatever that is, for a little while. And so when I came back online, and all of a sudden there's a room full of people, and I was like, okay, what the hell is this? And I came back online having done all my steps, counseling for years, all the stuff I did. I was like, and the meditation was part of it. The first thing that came to my mind is, okay, take a deep breath. What's going on right now? Check in. What's going on right now? First thing that comes to my mind is I'm laying there, right? And it's like, I have no regrets. Now, that's the first thing that came to my mind. Now, go back to newly sober.
Right.
I had shipping containers full of regrets. I was an active alcoholic, and everything that I had done in that realm. When I describe this to people, I say it's like the alchemy, the 12 steps. I love AA, right? That's how I got clean and sober. Takes the lead, so to speak, of everything that I had done and turns it into the gold by working the steps and making amends and all the things that we do. And the proof positive was literally when I came back from some other place, my heart started again, and I could say, I have no regrets. Like,
Wow.
Clean living wasn't, that's something where way back in my past, looking over my shoulder, metaphorically or otherwise, is kind of how I lived. And I live unapologetically clean. And that's, to me, like, it took me a long, the first sponsor I had, to get to your original question, Margaret, I said like a week and a half into it, all right, I think I'm on step 4. I want to cook because I'm like one of these guys, right? Everything's going to happen. And he said, I remember his exact words. I'm literally at this point 2-3 weeks sober.
Right.
He said, Bob, I'm not going to do a drive-through McDonald's version of your steps with you. If you don't like it, put me on your list of what's the list people you're mad at, right?
Resentment.
And get somebody else. So, needless to say, I had to go back to the drawing board, and it was probably 3 years before I did my amends.
So I appreciate both of you being so honest about your own story and sharing that, because I think it's really enlightening for family members. When you came to get sober and you were working your program of recovery and starting to have life come together, when you were sitting in that moment of facing, this is my journey, this is what I'm going to be doing, how long did you think it would take before the people you love the most would trust you again? How long did you think that would take? How fearful were you about that when you sat in the treatment experience or the rooms of AA when you first started?
Go ahead, Joe.
I would say, Margaret, that in my own immediate family, there was a lot of fear on behalf of my wife,
Mhm.
more than anyone, the person closest to me.
Right.
And it wasn't an angry resentment. It was a fearful one. It was just, I hope he can do this.
Mhm.
I like this. The other people in my life, it didn't take long, because I always say it's the most courageous, honest thing I've ever done in my whole life. And I still wear it very proudly on my sleeve every day, quietly. And people started to notice that. And I immediately kind of got into, people, places, and things. Maybe I changed some things, but
Mhm.
immediately was pretty comfortable with telling people where I was. I really was. I remember, and I don't think that my wife will mind me sharing this, but I was probably 6 months sober, and she accused me or thought I had been drinking. And I got so upset. And I don't know if Bob remembers it, but I got so upset, like, how dare she? And I hadn't. And Bob said to me, he always calls me OC. He said, OC, for 25 years, you've been doing this.
Right.
Please get off your high horse. She's scared. Something triggered something. So if you haven't, you haven't. Right. And I just needed to, it's the attraction, not promotion piece, right? Just do my work
Mhm.
and just go about it each day and show up. And, part of me was doing that. I think, an okay father in terms of the physical part of raising children, but I was so much more present, really listening and paying attention and being there and supportive. So I think the people that were closest to me were the ones that took the longest.
But far shorter than you imagined when you first landed in treatment, I'm guessing. Because most of us, when we land
Yeah.
in that place, think it's never going to heal. How will we get it back? And the irony is that I think family members, when they sit at the precipice of their loved one going to treatment, have similar fears. Will we like each other? Will we trust each other? Will we be able to connect? Will this ever be better? I don't like where it's at, but I know it. What the heck's coming? What if they don't want to be with me anymore once they get sober? There's a lot of fears on the family side that sound very familiar to what I used to hear on the unit sides at Hazelden when I was working in the treatment. It's incredible the parallels on both sides of the journey.
Margaret, you couldn't have given a better segue to my situation. This is a great setup. So I was, let's see, I got divorced when I think it was 8 or 9 years sober. So my closest family members, I have 3 sisters, 2 long-term sobriety before me. So there was a great understanding in my family of origin about, oh, this is really good. Stay with this course with Bob because this is really good stuff. But my wife at the time, and if she's listening, she would say the same. It was a real challenge. And then I got sober and we did counseling for a long time, try to figure out a way. We had 3 kids to make it work. And I think it's really important to say, just because you get sober doesn't mean every relationship is going to stay the course.
Right.
In fact, I'll even go one step further. My father, when I got sober, we sat down and I said, Dad, this is a new paradigm. We have to have a new relationship that's real, and it's gonna get real, or it really can't be, because this is not serving either one of us. And my new life as a sober man, it's going to be authentic or it's not going to be. And we couldn't see eye to eye on it, and our relationship kind of fell apart. And I didn't do that with any spite. It was just my core said it has to be authentic, or it's just not going to be in my new life, because non-authentic baloney type relationships, I had a lot, and I grew up with that. And so I don't look at it as collateral damage, but I look at it more as the people to move forward with, who could understand what I'm all about, really did. And here's the proof. My children now are 35 to 29, 3 kids. I have I don't know if I could have a better relationship with my children. And it's real. And whatever needs to be talked about. So they were really young when I got sober. But, to me, that's the proof. It's like the people who understand and can accept authentic me as I understand and accept authentic them move forward that way.
So what I hear is boundaries, not collateral damage.
Oh,
I hear you made an effort with the people that you loved in your life to make this relationship move forward in a healthier way together. And when it couldn't, you set a boundary you needed to set to take care of yourself.
right. To keep myself sober.
And have authenticity and integrity.
Right.
Come back next week, where Joe and Bob continue to share their insights into their self-care practices, and we discuss the importance of the family dynamics in the recovery journey. I want to thank my guest for their courage and vulnerability in sharing parts of their story. Please find resources on my website, embracefamilyrecovery.com. This is Margaret Swift Thompson. Until next time, please take care of you